All right, so I want to thank everyone for attending our Tuesday talk session. My name is Joe, and I'm the house manager at our Boston Harbor program. And today I'd like to welcome Ginny Lewis and Laki Vazakas from Boston Children's Hospital. They're with their creative arts team. And today they are holding an expressive arts workshop with us and kind of just showing a bit about the work that they do with the families at Boston Children's, the staff at Boston Children's, and really how to help a family document the medical journey that they go on while their child's receiving treatment and care. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our two presenters.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Laki. I've been an artist here at Boston Children's since 2011, and previously I was at Yale New Haven Children's from 2006 until 2018. And essentially, I've been an artist working in the video medium for years. I help patients, families, and staff to create different forms of video expression. And with regard to patients and families, they direct the creative process.
And I'm Ginny. I've been here at Boston Children's for 5 years, but I've been in hospital-based work for 10 years. I'm part of the creative arts team too. I'm the creative writer on staff. And all of my work has had a writing and book focus in general. My longer background is in education and child life services. And when I switched over to the field of child life and thinking about becoming a child life specialist, I worked on a writing intervention for one patient that just was a particularly good fit. And I guess in the hospital where I was working at the time, I ended up launching and implementing a writing program that was just for patients initially, but then we expanded out to siblings and families. And the work here has been really similar. I get to collaborate with Laki on a number of projects, but most of my work has a writing component to it. With that being said, I also offer visual art projects. And, I think we just try to offer something that will fit whatever the patient and family are up for in general.
Good. We do a lot of one-on-one projects at bedside with patients. In fact, I was just working with a 12-year-old patient upstairs. We do a lot of group work. Ginny does a lot of group work with behavioral health patients. We do a lot of work with parents and caregivers, and then we do staff-facing workshops, which really started right before the onset of the pandemic. And we do what we call storytelling rounds. We'll do an abbreviated version for you all in a little bit.
But I think a lot of it is group-based work. And then, I think the majority of our projects are something that we call journey projects. And that was something that Laki had worked on a lot here at Children's before I came aboard. Journey projects have tended to look a little different for each patient and family, but in general, they've tended to be book focused or video focused. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just some part of it could be the medical experience, it could be addressing hospitalization, or it could be something completely outside of it. But we do see a lot of parents chronicling, documenting the medical journey, and so we help them to curate the images and to acknowledge milestones and kind of give opportunities for meaning making in that creative process.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because every family and patient is different in terms of what they're up for, how involved of a journey project they really want it to be. And some people have different amounts of time to play with. There are some patients and families we've worked on journey projects with for many months, even as much as a year or more, especially for folks with a longer term diagnosis or a longer term stay. And then there are some patients and families who really just say, like, I just don't have that time or that bandwidth. I know I want to create something special that'll be a keepsake for my family, but I also know, I only during a given day, I can only work in these short spurts. Can we still create something? So we really try to tailor it to the individual and the family, what they're up for, and also just being realistic about their time constraints, operating on hospital time where, we may be interrupted at any moment. They may really only have 5 minutes of peace and quiet in a given day. I think when we connect with them in general, I think both of us always tend to say, we don't expect that you're going to be working independently between our sessions. This should never feel like homework. We just expect that, when we show up, we check in to see if you're up for something. And if you're not, we find a better time, but we never want it to be anything that feels pressured or labored. It's supposed to be something that's really joyful, and it's just an opportunity to kind of reflect on what they've been through.
Right. Yeah, and I think in terms of like practical tips for building any journey project, I mean, a lot of the journey projects that we both do begin with photographs. So it's tough because so many people are taking hundreds of photos, and we're usually asking them to take, select 25 to 50 as a starting point. And then obviously if the journey is continuing for months on end, there will be more photos to add, but, acknowledging milestones. And then we also talk about maybe a list of acknowledgements and thank yous and shout outs, which really appeals to folks who've been in the hospital and who've become very close with staff, particularly nursing. And then we also talk about, with whom do you want to share the project with? I mean, there are some families who, as you all know, are very, very out there in terms of social media interaction, and are, very public in their journey stories. But other folks just want something for their immediate family, and we want to honor that as well.
So, I think when we first sit down to talk with the patient or family about what they want for the journey project, that's kind of where we start. We start with this blank slate, and we really say, like, do you have a sense of who you want your audience to be? Is this really something that you want for your child eventually? If we're working with the caregivers, we'll say, do you want this to be for your child for someday? If they're a toddler, for example, in treatment, and parents might want to create something that's almost like a time capsule where it's something they look at together farther on down the line and say, like, this is what we were going through when you were so little. You will not remember this, but this, was a huge milestone for us. This was a major treatment. And then there are other folks who really might want to be sharing news about a diagnosis with their network for the first time. I've worked with a number of families in the NICU this past year who've said, we've been off the map since the baby arrived. This was not expected. We've been inpatient for almost 5 months. We haven't told anybody where we've been. We need to, really create something where we're kind of sharing the news of baby's arrival, but then also that there have been these unexpected complications, and we're not sure how to do that. We want to share this out, but we want to be thoughtful about what we're sharing and setting some boundaries. So everyone's really different in terms of the audience they want to reach and their motivation for creating a project. Sometimes it's really just for themselves. Other times they're really thinking in practical terms about, sharing with family, sharing news. Oftentimes, I think we both encounter a lot of patients and families who want to create a resource for others. There's, I think, a real impulse to kind of pay it forward. And especially with our, I would say, I don't know, like older school age patients and teens, a number of them really like to reflect on treatment and say, like, this is what I have learned. This is what I wish I'd known a year ago that I want to tell to a younger kid for moving through treatment. And that's where something like a book or a video can be a really helpful way of like harnessing that information and organizing it both for themselves and the reflective process, and then sharing out with someone else. But we really talk a lot about boundaries. Just what are your own boundaries in terms of what information you're sharing? What kind of imagery do you want to use? I think Laki bumps up against this even more than I do in terms of some of the medical images. Just like, do you want to show some harder pictures of treatment? For some families, that carries a lot of meaning. For others, they're like, no, we want only like soft images of what the child's been through. We don't want to share those publicly. That was so hard. Everyone's different in terms of the comfort level, would you say?
I think I've given other families some families the option of having sort of two different versions, one that's much more public facing and one that's private for their families. And that may include some more difficult imagery of medicalization, hospitalization, post-surgery, things like that.
I just wanted to check in. Are you all able to see the slide right now that says part 2? Have the slides been advancing?
Oh, sorry. No, I just see the main slide, I believe, the introduction slide.
Sorry, let me try. I just sometimes bump up against this when screen sharing over Zoom. I apologize.
But I guess while Ginny's searching, I think we really try to determine family comfort level. And we also emphasize that we can connect in person, but we can also do a lot of work via email. And I'm able to, for example, send work in progress securely by the hospital secure file transfer.
Are you all able to see part 2 right now?
Yes. Yeah.
I apologize. It just gets a little glitchy sometimes.
That's okay. No worries at all.
But just rewinding for a second, I think we talk a lot just about personal thresholds and boundaries when we're first starting out with a project. We talk about how contained of a story folks want, if they really just want to talk about like one milestone in care, if they're talking about the medical journey, or one life event that might be completely away from treatment. I mean, there are some patients and families who say, I want to talk about anything but this medical journey. Like, I want to talk about our family trip to Switzerland last year, which carried so much meaning for us. And we said, that's great. Like, that's a journey project too. It does not have to be a medical story. It's just a personal narrative that's important to you and your family. But when I think we're first launching, we also will always ask, do you think you're more of a visual thinker? Are you somebody who's more language driven? Do you have an inkling? Like, do you know that you're someone who would really prefer something like video? Do you feel like you've always had a book in you? And some people will have a very clear sense at the beginning, and others, I think it's more of an exploratory process. And I think since we tag team so often too, it's interesting to see the patients who will like shift gears and say, actually, I think I am more interested in a video, or, oh, I want both. And just what comes out in the process. The cool thing, I think, is that since we often will work from the same photos and imagery, oftentimes patients and families can create 2 projects from the same material that look and feel completely different.
Yeah, so we talk about, how do you, I can give one good example in terms of how do you introduce yourselves or your family to your audience. So I was working at Yale several years ago with a 16-year-old patient, rare rhabdosarcoma, rare diagnosis, and she and her grandmother had documented some amazing parts of their journey. And she had one scene in the beginning where she was coming home from high school and she took off her wig, and I said, well, how do you want to introduce yourself? And she wrote this wonderful introduction, and she essentially said, while other 16-year-olds were thinking about the prom and thinking about other things like that, I was confronting this really difficult diagnosis. And it was a very powerful voiceover, but I think without that, the piece would have been there wouldn't have been any context for that footage. So we also talk about trying to avoid repetitive imagery and concentrate on the progression of milestones. And we also talk about chronology. Some families want to have this very precise chronology, and others want to have something more impressionistic. We always talk about music with the video because many of the families are working with music therapy, and we want them to have the option of creating something original with a music therapist. But other families have really have some music that has really gotten them through tough times, some Beatles songs or what have you. And if I'm able to find it on YouTube or Spotify, we utilize that. And lyrics, we talk about also instrumental music versus somebody singing somebody else's lyrics, and we want folks to arrive at their own meaning. So I also encourage the use of instrumental music a lot of the time, so it's not as intrusive. And then we talk about reflection, what sort of reflection. They can often work with Ginny to create a written reflection that could be a voiceover narration, or it could just be a text panel at the end. And then I talk about, just how much space video takes up on somebody's phone or computer, and thinking about moving forward, how to share it with family. If it's going to be texted, emailed, I've done 20 and 30-minute videos, and then it becomes a little complicated to share it with family. So we work through that as well.
What is the maximum number of images you've ever incorporated into a video? Because I know there are so many patients and families who run into who just have thousands from the last few months.
I mean, I'm working with a patient, earlier we talked about asking for 25 to 50, and then if the family's been there for forever, they already have 100. But I'm working now with a family that's given me 400 images and probably 80 videos. And because they've been here so long, and because I've forged such a close relationship with them, I'm kind of going with it. But I'm trying, just for my own sake, and also, in terms of like thinking about how they're going to share the piece, trying to, rein them in a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of a blessing and a curse in some ways that we all have so much material and documentation just sitting in our pockets at all times with, phones and photo galleries at this point. Like we all have, for the most part, video capability and great cameras just riding in our pockets all the time. So there's a lot of material, to work from at any given point. Yeah, can you all see the book-based slide?
We are actually still on, I think the first slide for part 2.
Okay.
And if you guys want, if you're gonna switch slides, you can just mention it to me and then I'll just let you know if we see it. If that's easier for you.
Sure.
I'm not a technology person though, so.
Sorry, I just have not mastered the Canva screen share option. Can you see the book-based one?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. So, with starting off with the book project, I think I tend to launch from a similar place that Laki does. Like I'll really often say, like, are there photos that you want to work from? Can we build off of those? They can make for an interesting writing exercise just as a jumping off point. But in general, I will start off with a family by just offering that blank slate saying, is there anything about the story that you want to tell? Like, can you envision it already? Do you feel like it might be memoir, or are you someone who is more open to poetry? What form of expression do you tend to work in? How much narrative do you think you want in all of this? Do you want to do something just like a collection of your most beautiful photos with some simple captions, some simple dates? Because there are some really beautiful examples of families that have done just that. They've really done just a coffee table size book where it's been a photo dump of the very best of family photos. And then they've done a simple caption or very little language at all. And it's completely stunning and beautiful. And then there are books more like this one. This is a memoir that one of our parents wrote that took over a year. That's straight narrative. There are maybe a handful of photos interspersed throughout the text, but it's really a long reflection. And, both forms are great. It's really just what the individual wants and also what they feel like they want to give to the project. This is an interesting one to talk about, actually, because this mom, we're very close to her, and she's done a lot of video projects and journey projects with Laki too, but she started off with a completely different intent for her piece. She said, I know I want to write a piece that's really just about how we navigate the hospital. She had a major grief experience. She had lost her husband while her child was also battling a pretty intense health situation. And she said, I don't want to talk about any of that. I don't want to go into losing Steve or my grief. I don't want to go into that sad place. Like, that's not interesting to me. I want to talk about like how you fight the hospital system. And, I'm kind of like a boxer. I take on the system. And in the end, this piece is, a beautiful piece. It's all about grief. And she ended up working through her grief in the writing process. And I think we both were completely taken by surprise by where the writing took her. But it's just an interesting example of like where the pen will take you once you get started. Some people feel like they know where their starting point is. Others, that's where I can step in and just offer some scaffolding and some questions. I'd like to always start broad and then winnow in if possible, just because I feel like with both of us, I don't know, like 8 times out of 10, maybe when we sit down with someone, they already have like a driving force or something they know they want in their project. So we never want to like close down possibilities when we're starting off. I guess another thing I always will ask about is just if someone already has a writing practice, if they like to journal, if they really just like to post on social media. Caring Bridge and some Facebook posts are really interesting jumping off points for a number of families. Like I've worked with a lot of moms who will say, I don't write, I'm not a writer. I do, post a number of reflections every week on Caring Bridge. And when we go through and just intentionally look at them, you'll see that they've unconsciously built a writing practice, that they are really starting to get into writing territory. And often we can use those just for beginning to draft a piece. It can be interesting building blocks towards a larger piece, just thinking about what milestones they've already written about that they might want to bring into a longer form piece. Another question I think we both touch on in projects is just aesthetics, thinking about if there are particular images or symbols that are important for the child or the family, any colors you want to definitely include or completely avoid. And then the last one is also just, do you want to include an author statement or biography? This is Alma's. She really wanted a professional looking biography for the back because she used her book as a fundraiser to support the construction of a library in her hometown in the Philippines, where they have never had a library system before. Kid created ones are pretty fun. They'll really just showcase like some of the things that are most important to them. And we both will help with taking like professional author photos, which is pretty nice. I'm just going to advance the slide.
And please, if you have any questions, let us know,
Yeah.
just throw them out there.
We did want to offer this today. We wanted to offer a really quick version of our storytelling rounds because we were, hoping that if you were thinking about what a journey project would look like or what it's like to get started with one of these pieces, you could do a little brainstorming on your own. When we offer these here at Children's, we tend to start off by looking at a poem or a piece of art together just to get into a different space, get a different set of gears spinning. This is all borrowed from the narrative medicine workshop model that comes out of Colombia. They will really create intentional time and space for these sessions where really we'll begin with a piece of art or writing to create that common language and dialogue, and then move into a writing prompt. But it's not like a traditional workshop where there's pointed critique. It's really trying to have supportive and non-hierarchical dialogue just around a writing prompt and building that pause for art and writing into the flow of the day here in the hospital setting.
Yeah, we've done a lot of workshops. We've partnered with nursing education here at Boston Children's. So we've done, I don't know, dozens of workshops. We've had really great participation. We've had really powerful dialogues within the Zoom spaces, and we're hoping to resume these in person at some point. So can you see that, the prompt? All right, so we usually take I think instead of 10 minutes, we'll take 5 minutes, but we'll have you turn off your camera and mic and look through your phone's gallery and choose an image of someone close to you. And then we'll leave the prompt up, but we'd like to invite you to kind of reflect on the power of the image and what the image evokes. And then we'll come back and we'll have a little dialogue.
I think we are going to do 10. I think we have enough time for it, if that's all right. So we'll set a timer and call you back at 1:40. Thank you.
Just wondering if we could all come back in about 2 minutes. Thanks. So whenever you have a chance, come on back. Well, thanks for coming back. Generally what we do is we, if people are moved to share either an extract of their writing or even the image, we found that it really elicits some really beautiful dialogue within the space. So I don't know if anybody's moved to share anything.
You never have to, but it is kind of fun when there's an exchange.
Yeah, I'm totally willing to share some of mine. So let me just share my screen here. Desktop. I'm not sure, unfortunately, if I can share my screen. Would I be able to text you the photo, Ginny? Does anyone else have a photo that they'd like to share? I have to quit Zoom to do it, I guess. I haven't. Sorry. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I'll put my cell phone in the chat and you can text it. But while we're waiting, I'm just wondering if anybody else would want to share either part of their writing or the image that they wrote about.
So I just sent mine through and I can share at least what I wrote about it. So I shared a picture of my niece. She just turned 1 and I just went to visit her in Buffalo, which is really great. That's where all my family lives. So looking at the photo in particular, definitely a sense of happiness and connection. Every time I visit Buffalo, I tend to stay with my sister. I have 2 other nieces, so 3 total. So it always feels good to see all of them together. I think on some level, there have been just some big changes in my family over time. Some not so good ones, people passing away and just things like that. But, just being around my nieces kind of reminds me of, the truth that not all change is bad and things can change and really good things can come from it too. And then also, since I live, far away from family, I think every time I, go and visit home and especially see my youngest niece, it moves me to be more intentional with how I spend time with them. I think when I was younger, my oldest niece is now 20 and I kind of missed out on a lot of those early milestones. So I just, try to make it a point to visit more often for birthdays, check in more often, just make sure that I'm not missing out on those events as often. There she is with some noodles on her head.
Joe, can you remind us how old she is?
So that was at her, she just turned 1 year old. Yep.
No, I definitely hear you about trying to connect with niece and nephews when they're growing up so fast.
Yeah.
My niece just graduated from college, and we haven't seen her in a long time.
Yeah.
I connected to your reflection too. Lucky and I are married, and we share nieces and nephews at this point. And one of the things that I've really appreciated, but also makes me a little wistful, is Lucky is really connected with my older nephew, and we have a new little one as well. And I feel like we're trying to maximize that time, because I feel like Lucky's really made me appreciate that I really missed some big chunks of time with my nephew. It's a pleasure to get to know him now as he's turning into more of a teenager, but it does make me think like, oh, you really have to maximize these wonderful windows you get. But it's such a beautiful portrait of her. I mean, she looks completely delighted with the noodles too.
She's having a good time, definitely. Yeah. And then Kyle did share a photo with me. If he wanted to speak to it, I can send it over to you as well. Kyle, you're muted. Did you want to say anything?
I mean, I'm good.
You're good? Okay. No worries.
Would anyone else care to share, or even just a part of their reflection, or something that they were thinking about in going through some of the portraits?
I can share a bit. I don't work with any of you, so it's easy to get personal. But I'm working from home today, so I have this photo that's on our fridge. So that's just my partner and their children. So I have a 3-year-old and a like 18-month-old. He's about a year and a half. That's a trip from last summer. We flew to Montreal to attend a wedding from my husband's friend. So that photo's on our fridge. It's been on our fridge for like a year. And there's a lot of joy from that photo, because I think there's a lot of like, it's very special to create memories as a family, especially with young kids. And that's like brought me a lot of joy. I have like 1,000 photos, like, well, thousands of photos of my children and documenting their journey too, growing up. But when I sat with the photo too, it does like, it gets a little bit complex, I think too, because like motherhood is very difficult, and I had my first daughter in March of 2020, so it's like not the easiest time to become a parent. And there's been a big shift in just like, it's a big shift in identity becoming a mom, but then also dealing with COVID like the rest of the world too. So the like more I sat with it, I was like, oh, this was like, it's like 5 months postpartum with my second, and just like was not a super easy time mentally either. So it's complicated. There's this joy of creating family memories and taking kids on a plane to Montreal, but also dealing with the like complexity of like being overwhelmed and being a new mom too. So, but it'll still go back on the fridge.
I feel like you could do like a really wonderful tapestry of fridge photos, like projects inspired by just the montages of people's fridges,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did my undergrad in fine art too. Actually, I majored in photography, and I haven't had the capacity to like digest the last like few years and what's the progression of what's come across my fridge and the kids' drawings and the pictures and stuff. But I feel like someday I'll create some sort of project that comes out of this that will make sense.
I'm just curious if you feel like there's some applicability in terms of the families that you all work with, because we're encountering families who are, here for a year, and many of them are staying, at Ronald McDonald, or they've reached other accommodations, but I feel like, particularly on some of the cardiac units, we have families who are here for such a long period of time. And obviously the oncology families who are in and out over the course long periods of time. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are about the applicability of some of these projects.
I'm very excited about this. I know we don't have a creative arts team at our hospital. We're not a pediatric hospital, so we don't serve the whole population, and we're connected to the IWK, but we serve kind of families more from New Brunswick, which is the adjacent province. But I know like families for us, we serve mostly NICU families, so we see them for kind of 2 or 3 months at a time. And I know the staff in the NICU create kind of scrapbook pages for families, but I'm very excited to the idea of how kind of I can implement this kind of project like more in the family room when they have maybe, I don't know, time or capacity to think about these kind of things. Maybe I can just provide the prompts and the supplies, but yeah.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of, we had a Tuesday talk. We had a speaker who spoke a bit about trauma-informed care. And I think just the power that you give people to kind of, have control over their narrative a bit as much as they can and kind of choose the things they'd like to express and show just seems like be really important, just to make sure that people are able to process what they're going through. They can make meaning out of it. So I think it's very applicable for the families that we serve. I was wondering, how do families get connected to you? Do they, is it something that I could mention to them? Is it something that if they're at the hospital, they sort of find out about these resources anyway?
I mean, most of our referrals come through Child Life, but we also receive referrals from chaplaincy and from social work and from nursing. But the vast majority come through Child Life. And we're a big hospital, more than 400 beds. And I think it's sometimes difficult. We do have a good relationship with the Hale Center for Families, and we're able to actually use that space sometimes to connect with families who are here on an outpatient basis. But there's no easy answer. I mean, you can certainly share our email information, and we could also at some point maybe even come in person and talk to your families.
Oh, that's awesome. That'd be great. Very cool.
And I think the other thing that we talk about is doing staff support too. And it's something that you might all consider, doing your own sort of version of storytelling rounds as a way to give you all an opportunity to reflect on practice, because we're all taking in so much. And we do this pretty often for nurses, social work. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very good partnership with nursing education. And so we do that fairly regularly. And I feel especially the nurses need a lot of support now, given the high acuity and also, at least here in this hospital, a lot of behavioral health patients.
And it's been interesting to see how many different areas and teams will use creative arts workshops in different ways. How it could be a team building thing in particular areas too. And there are some cohorts we've worked with where it's really just been, oncology or the NICU really wants just to have an opportunity to team build and reflect, but then also to do something just to get a different set of gears spinning. And it's always neat to see how many creative types are on any given team, how many musicians we have, how many artists we have on staff. And I don't know, I'm always inspired by our staff work.
And we've done some partnerships with the PAC team, the Pediatric Advanced Care team, to do grief workshops with parents, with bereaved parents. So we've done 2 series of workshops with bereaved parents. 3, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, and they've been a little different each time, but our last one was actually photo narrative based, and that seemed to be a really beautiful fit. Folks were just working off their photographs like today, but they would come to each session with a photo connecting back to their child and a particular milestone or memory. And it was nice because there was some real pacing behind the work, and so they would have a different exercise each week. But the group just bonded in a really beautiful way. So we've been thinking more about bringing more photo narrative work into the grief sessions.
But you can see just from your own experience, you bring a photo that you're connected to, and if you feel comfortable in the space, you can become very expansive in describing the moments and the context. And what we usually do with, for example, with nursing is have folks send me the photos, and then they can extract like a line or a word that particularly resonated. In some cases, draw it and photograph it. So I'll create this whole montage comprised of words and images and send it to that particular cohort. And if it's, for example, nurses who are celebrating their first year of practice, it's kind of a big deal, because if you think about what the last few years have been like, very arduous, very difficult, very challenging, it's a chance for them to celebrate their first year and also celebrate the connections they have with folks who've come up with them.
That's great. Yeah, I love how like expansive it is in terms of doing this with families, also with staff, and just, covering kind of a wide variety of topics too. That's really awesome. Cool. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining in and sharing all of this with us. I was going to ask, would it be possible to send over the slides and I can share them with, I think Emily was really interested in kind of just looking at this too and constructing something in her program. And then Kyle and I can look at it too for our Boston program.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have our email addresses. So if any of you want to get in touch, please do.
Okay, that sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure having both of you on. I just want to remind everyone of our next Tuesday talk, which is August 8th, and that will be on grief and loss with one of our Providence, Rhode Island volunteers. So if you'd like to join in on that, please feel free to do so. And otherwise, thank you guys again for joining in and hosting this for us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks kindly.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Good day.
Bye.